Hello and welcome to episode 345 of Retro Encounter, RPG Fans Weekly podcast of many topics. I'm Mike Sollosi, and we're here to discuss the same game that we were on about last week, Live Alive, specifically the recent Switch remake of Live Alive, and we're bringing back the same two panelists as last week as well, starting with Tom Cox.
Hi there.
And Wes Iliff.
Hey, everybody.
Wes and Tom. I was able to finish this game in time for the podcast. I know I say that at the beginning of every part 2 of a Game Journal episode because I have to establish like how much I can safely talk about, or at least talk about with some level of experience or expertise. But we all managed to finish this one well in advance because I don't know if we mentioned this last episode, but this is a slightly brisk game. I spent a lot of time doing everything I could in the final chapter, and I was still right at 25 hours total. So I know 25 hours is a lot of time to do anything, but when the three of us have all played 100-hour plus JRPGs in the past, this game does not waste its time and is in and out in under 30 hours. Was that your experience as well?
Yeah, I think I clocked in around 25, 26 hours.
And I was surprised at the final chapter. Just kind of grabbed me in. I ended up just staying up late one night because it was 11 o'clock. I was close enough to beating it, and just flew by.
The final chapter, which we will talk about soon, is pretty significant. I think it was maybe like a full quarter of the game, like maybe say 6 of my 24 hours. But let's go back a little bit before we get there. In the previous episode, I mentioned I did 4 of the chapters. I did, let's see, Imperial China, present day, near future, and prehistory. Not exactly in that order. And I did the 3 remaining ones, which we talked about a little bit, as well as the rest of the game. And just quick and dirty summaries of those. I thought Far Future was lovely. I wish there was a little bit less just walking back and forth, but the vibe of it and how adorable Cube is, it was excellent. I loved it a lot. Wild West, I think is maybe the one chapter in the whole game I thought was too short. It like I wish it was twice as long because I really liked the character of Sundown and the townspeople. And it was basically just one side quest disguised as a whole chapter, but I liked it a whole lot. I would have liked that for that one to be longer. And the last one I didn't go over was, why can't I think of it? Oh, it was Fall of Japan. It was Oda. Yeah.
Oboromaru.
Yes, Oboromaru. And that one was also great. It was in terms of nonlinear design, it might have been the best chapter. I don't think I liked the narrative in it as much as some of the other ones, but it was a lot of fun ninja action, and Oboromaru has a lot of cool moves and is one of the more fun characters to control in the game. So just thumbs up for all of the chapters I didn't get to before recording the previous episode. But those 7 are behind us. We've done the chapters of the 7 main characters at this point, but there's an 8th chapter with an 8th main character, and that is the Middle Ages and our friend Ørsted. Whoever wants to go first, what were your impressions of the Middle Ages chapter, the chapter 8 of Live Alive?
I think it was one of the stronger chapters, to be honest. I think like aesthetically it would look great. I think the character like Ørsted kind of reminded me a little bit of Golden Sun almost, and it was kind of like, oh man, they could really remake a Golden Sun in this engine. But I think just the whole premise of like, he was it was him versus his friend the wizard, and they had that tournament where they basically had to whoever won the right to marry the princess.
Yeah,
and then she gets kidnapped.
The wizard friend is Strabo, and the princess is Alethea.
Yes.
Or Alethea, maybe.
Yeah, and then all kicks off from there. She gets kidnapped, basically. And then sort of set off on sort of a journey. So you come across, is it Hash that night? Is it that night,
Yeah.
Hash?
Yeah.
And Uranus.
Yeah. And then you have to basically take on the Lord of Dark.
Right. This chapter felt like a very condensed version of a Dragon Quest game.
Yes.
Like at least at the outset, it takes a turn at one point. but yeah, you have like hero swordsman with a mage friend. There's a dark lord threatening the kingdom. The dark lord is a known quantity, and you sort of recruit allies, find the sacred sword, and then challenge the dark lord at their castle.
Yeah, I was kind of impressed because all every chapter in this game feels like its own little mini game, like full size game condensed into an hour or two. But this one especially felt like a love letter to traditional JRPGs, the contemporaries of the time. That like you got to take place in a fantasy setting. You got to have these kind of character archetypes, and it feels like it's playing it straight for half of your playtime before things really turn around on you, and it feels like, okay, yeah, this is what I'm expecting out of Live Alive. It's taken those tropes and always taken more interesting turns over time, and this one certainly feels like that.
Yeah, it feels like a very normal JRPG of the stripe that we've been talking about until around the midpoint. Eventually, your party of Ersted, Strabo, Hash, and Uranus goes to the I think it's called the Archon's Rest. They challenge the Dark Lord or Lord of Dark at their lair. They fight a bunch of demons, and then after they defeat a dark apparition, um, the princess is nowhere to be found. But Hash, who was like resisting going back into service, he like be Hash was so offended by how he was sort of rejected from society after his hero's work was done, that he's been living like a hermit in a cabin in the mountains for years. But he's also somewhat out of shape. So even though he was your strongest party member by far in that first half, towards the end, after you defeat the demon at the top of the tower, he's bleeding out the mouth and dying from from his overexertion. So Hash passes away, and then while Uranus, Strabo, and Ersted are escaping the tower, uh, Strabo gets caught in the tower's crumbling. So like a some falling rocks or something, or similar cover a door, and he's trapped. And so Uranus and Ersted do make it out, but without Alethea and with two of their party members gone. And so there's a bit of a sad moment when you return to the castle, and but the king and the minister and everybody welcomes you, although they are disappointed that Alethea is still missing. And you go and have a well-deserved rest in a guest room of the castle. And then things get real dark. Uh, should I just summarize the rest of the chapter?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
this
yeah,
is
I
a good
guess.
Yeah.
point to dive right head first into the spoiler territory.
Okay. Yeah. This is the biggest spoiler that we're hitting for these Live Alive episodes yet. So buckle up. Um, Ersted wakes up in the middle of the night. Because he sees this shadow of Strabo, and you're like, "Is that Strabo's ghost? What's going on?" And so you go to you follow it to the king's throne room, and you see another dark apparition. It looks like that the Dark Lord's returned. So Ersted attacks it, but then like the room fades around him, and it's not a demon that he's slain; it's the king. And then the minister enters the room, immediately calls the guards, and the minister and several guards see you, Ersted, with sword drawn, blood on your hands, the king dead at your feet. It was obviously some kind of trick or illusion, but you cannot talk them out of that. Uranus comes in at that point, asking what the commotion was, sees what's happened. I think Uranus does understand what's going on basically immediately, but he can't really help you at the moment. So Ersted flees. You fight some guards on the way out. You go to the little town where you were welcomed as a hero earlier in the chapter, but the people that were celebrating you are now shunning you, obviously, and they're terrified of you. So Ersted, sort of resigned to his fate, goes back to the castle, is thrown in the dungeon, and Uranus like pleads with him, tells him, "You need to stay strong. You can still fix this if you save Princess Alethea and make things as right as you can." And then Uranus gives his life to help break you out of jail by using some magic to open your cell door. So you get out of there, you fight some more guards, go back to the Archon's Rest, fight your way through the tower again, solo this time. And in the same room where Hash died, you find a secret passage that and it looked like that Strabo had been examining that mysterious block earlier, before he got trapped in the room. And going through there, you reach the real top of the tower, and who is there but Strabo himself? Like Strabo had been jealous and resentful of Erstead the whole time, especially because Strabo was in love with Alethea, but Erstead, just being the strong, charismatic one, won the tournament and earned her hand, while Strabo was still sort of left holding the bag. So Strabo, with the power of the Dark Lord, attacks you. You kill him. And then who comes up later than Alethea, who revealed that she had feelings for Strabo. It's a little bit unclear whether she was really in love with Erstead all along. Maybe she was, but then was, what was made so sad and disappointed by him failing to rescue her that she abandoned him, or maybe she was in love with Strabo all along, or maybe there's a Stockholm syndrome something situation.
There are a few line reads early in that make you wonder if, like, maybe she was into Strabo the entire time and she just resigned herself.
Yeah, it's. I think there's that's a fair interpretation. There's I don't know exactly what her feelings were all along, but she is definitely upset with Erstead now, and she dramatically kills herself over Strabo's corpse. And if Erstead wasn't driven into despair then, he definitely is now. So he just screams, laments his situation, and decides, well, if I can't be accepted by the people, and my best friend and my newlywed wife are willing to die rather than live with me, then I will be the next Dark Lord. And so Erstead absorbs all of the hate and resentment from Strabo and others. A bunch of dark energy enters him, and he sort of becomes the new Dark Lord, or Odio, which might have been the evil force of hate Odio's plan all along. And that's the end of chapter 8.
Yeah,
Hooray!
it's a very upbeat kind of an ending.
So I was just monologuing for quite a while there. Tom, what was your reaction and impression of chapter 8 after you finished it?
Well, I think the it's sort of like the point at which all the chapters come together and you sort of realize the connection to them. Obviously, Odio is the name, or is part of the name of every single boss you've fought up to the point. So at this point, you can sort of going into the realizing you're sort of going into the final chapter, you can see how they're all going to start to connect with Orsted's story.
Yeah, all of the bosses of the previous chapters did have Odio or Odeo, or at least Odie in their names somewhere. I think it was dark. I think it was the dinosaur in prehistory was called Odo,
Odo.
but it's a similar name connecting all of them. So it's not hard to figure out that there is a connection, even if you're only even if you're only 2 or 3 chapters in. But it looks like that Odio is some pervasive force of hatred or darkness that connects generations and different time periods. But it's only really explicitly called a Dark Lord and a pervasive force, rather than just a coincidence in the Middle Ages chapter.
You know that something's up, like in every chapter. Once you get the second one, it's like, oh, this name sounds kind of familiar. The OD something, or OD10, or OD1 Lee, and all of these different names. And it's kind of cool to see that all come together because you're waiting. You know, almost certainly know that something's going to explain all of this together. And the way that it's pulled in by giving you access to a playable character and having basically everything go wrong, where everyone else was able to overcome despair, he just can't. And it's illustrated in Hash and his life, and how he kind of grew disgusted with the people being kind of purposefully helpless and always just going to him when they need something and never as a human. And seeing that happen and kind of fast forward to Erstead is actually kind of like heartbreaking in some ways, because Erstead seems like a pretty okay person up until he's extremely not.
Yeah, it was quite like a shocking change of character in a way. Like until that point, he seems quite righteous, you know.
Yeah, Ursad seems like a normal knight who wants to be a hero and wanted to marry Alethea. I don't think there's anything uh, that was arrogant or mean about him before. I mean, he's mostly a silent protagonist up until the end. But I think you sort of have a positive impression of him, and then just multiple awful things happen at once that would probably drive a number of RPG characters to despair. But I and it feels like it was orchestrated. I think my feeling was that Odio wanted Ersted from the beginning because he was the strongest one and maybe the one most worth corrupting, and maybe even amplified the hate in Strabo and Alethea's hearts to have him cross that line, or at least that there's not a lot of text that would indicate that, but that was what the subtext I garnished.
There's that little twist of the knife from Strabo where he talks about how, like, oh, you've always been greedy, you've always been after the rewards, you've always been, and you don't really get that impression from Orsted, but when you think about it and how most RPG main characters work, there is some degree where, maybe there's some truth to that. It's hard to say, but uh, it's kind of a scathing indictment of the traditional heroic knight role, whether it's accurate or not. And it happens in kind of a way that makes you kind of stop for a second. You're almost taken aback by Strabo's accusations of how horrible Erstead actually is.
Yeah, I mean, it's the RPG main character thing of them being good at everything, and I think part of it might be Strabo. I don't know if it comes from a real place necessarily. I really felt like Strabo was almost whining, "Why can't I ever win? Why is it always you?" And I deserve something. Damn it, was which is somewhat of an entitled attitude, but also if Ersted is more of a jerk than the chapter indicated, then I don't know. There's multiple ways to interpret it, but the end result is pretty clear.
It makes me kind of wonder the way that Strabo puts that, he did all this for love because he loved Althea from the start. And I think depending on your interpretation, it changes this, because Althea loved him the whole time, and Strabo almost implies that Orsted knows um, that Strabo is in love with this princess, and he talks about hoping just this once Orsted would just step aside and let them have what they want. And again, Strabo's not a reliable narrator. You can't really say for sure whether that's true or not, but there is a part of me that can feel for Strabo, even though, yeah, the attacks that have taken lives and have been genuinely indefensible. But it is still kind of interesting just to see a little bit of like how he sees it, even if how he sees it isn't necessarily accurate.
I mean, I guess the reason that all of this happens to Ersted so quickly is because of Strabo, and Hash had allies when he defeated the Dark Lord 20 years earlier or whatever the time period was. But if Uranus was more like Strabo, maybe like Hash could have become the new Dark Lord. Like you see Ersted almost reenact the darkness that Hash feels, but way accelerated, which I know we mentioned before a little bit. But I think if Strabo was a more steadfast companion, it maybe the Dark Lord's plot wouldn't have worked out. We're meditating on chapter 8 quite a bit, but this setting returns wholesale in chapter 9, the final chapter, because generally, well, no, not generally. The final chapter of Live Alive is the player choosing a main, first of all. Of these 8 characters that you've played the stories of, you choose one that's going to be your permanent main character that never leaves your party. And then, in most cases, you'll recruit the other 6, and then challenge the Dark Lord version of Ersted as the game's final boss. Or if you chose Ersted as your main character, your the story becomes kill the other 7. Now, I did not go the Ersted route, but Wes, I know you've played this game before. Do you know how that one goes?
Yeah, more or less. They're pretty short. They're pretty condensed. You can knock them out pretty quick. But it's him destroying these heroes, essentially the heroes that you built up over this time. There are technically two endings depending on a dialogue choice that you make early in when you select Orsted. In the, I believe it's the Armageddon ending, where you actually do a reverse boss rush where you control the bosses from every chapter against those heroes, and you're tasked with changing history and having those evil incarnations of Odio win against the heroes, which is fascinating.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah. And the other path is just Ersted in his knight version, killing the other seven.
Yeah, essentially it's being the big boss and finding those people wanting. He kind of has the same kind of setup where he wants to test these people and try to figure out why did they persevere, and then finding out that, oh, it was just circumstance that allowed them to do this. If they had been put in my shoes, they wouldn't have done any better.
I did not go that route, but when you beat the game, it does give you a clear save data where it goes back to this chapter select moment. So you can replay the final chapter easily with either a new main character or the Ersted route right after you finish. And I might yet do that because that's interesting to me.
Yeah, I might go back. Sounds quite interesting, quite unique compared to other games.
But generally speaking, you either pick one of the seven mains and then go to one of two final endings, or you pick Ersted, and in killing the other seven, you also choose between one of two endings. But let's talk about how we built our parties a little bit. Tom, starting with you, who did you pick as your main character, and how was, like, let's say the early parts of the final chapter? How did they go for you?
So I went with Obamaru, the ninja, and then the three other characters I chose were Pogo, Sundance, I think that's the name, and it was also Yoon. They were the ones I went with, and then obviously part of your sort of when you wake up in the world and you have to you can't just like ask the characters to join. You have to take on sort of the different quests. So that there was Pogo's, which is the you find him in the forest, and basically you have to visit different sort of points of interest across the map. So I think there's one in, is it Heroes Rest, where Hash lives, I believe.
Wait, you're talking about Pogo or Sundance?
Pogo's. You have to take on one of the trials. You have to go up to different points of interest on the map.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay, well,
You go into it's like the ice cave.
okay, all right. I mine went differently than that because all right. Before we continue here, I picked as my main Lei Kugo, the young woman from the Imperial China chapter, and when she finds Pogo, he gets all red in the face and embarrassed and likes her and immediately joins you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but I think it's just because Pogo likes the ladies, but I I wasn't
Yeah.
aware that there was a whole scavenger hunt you had to do for Pogo.
And mine was actually a bit different there too.
So Wes, who was your main character choice, and how did your Pogo recruitment go?
So I went with Sundown, partially because he's difficult to recruit, partially because he's just a dope ranged character who barely needs to move to hit anything on the screen. And I went and recruited Lei Kugo first, which was just a fight with her, pretty simple. And then Pogo was down south in a forest clearing, and when I talked to him, he got surprised, hid. I just had to go and chase him and talk to him in that same location 3 times, and then he joined. And then when I went up to the ice cave, that's where his final dungeon was with his ultimate
Yeah.
weapon and all
That's
that
what
fun
I'm
stuff.
thinking of. Sorry.
Oh, okay. You were thinking of his character dungeon. All right.
Yeah. Sorry.
Which is an interesting part of this final chapter.
Yeah, as you recruit each character, each one has a dedicated special dungeon that where they need to be present for you to enter it, and it has their ultimate weapon at the end. So the arc of it is basically recruiting all the characters, settling on a party of 4, and you can only get the best ending if you've recruited all 4. I'm sorry, if you've recruited all 7 when you decide to go fight Odio. But remarkably, my party was the same as Tom's, except I had Lei Kugo instead of Yun, and Lei Kugo was my main, while Tom's was Oboromaru. And That's because I mean it's you have Pogo who's a tank, then you have two very fast attackers in whoever has the Earth and Heart, whoever the Earth and Heart Shifu is, plus Oboromaru, and Sundown just being an amazing ranged attacker. Wes, what was your final four that you settled on?
So I kept Lei Kugo the whole time because she's awesome. And she eventually gets an ability that hits the entire screen and takes out a lot of the giant groups of enemies, which made me happy.
Yeah, Sacred Dragon's Temper, which
Yes.
she her last four moves that she have the dragon, tiger, horse, and Mount Descending Peaks Fist, like
Mhm.
her last four moves are just absolute world beaters.
Yeah.
I love her like level 12 through 16 moves.
Yeah, she carried a lot of boss fights for me because I actually did end up. I grabbed those two and then a Boromaru next, and then I rotated out the last um, uh, character to do everyone's character dungeons because I just wanted to see what they were all like and get everyone their final weapons and whatnot. But eventually, I landed on Cube, who I went and got last because you can't level him up anyways. So why not just grab him at the very end, do his final weapon thing, and let him come be a support bot? Um,
Yeah, my arc went a little differently. I know that Sundown was annoying to recruit, and I actually couldn't find him for a while, so I recruited Sundown last. The three that were in my party basically all the time were Leikugo, Pogo, and Oboromaru, and that last slot rotated out a lot. I recruited Akira very early because he's just very easy to find. He's just sleeping on a bench in the village.
yeah, he's easy like Sunday morning.
Yeah, and then I recruited the Kira, did his dungeon, then swapped him out for Masaru, did his dungeon, swapped him out for Cube, did his dungeon, and then finally figured out where I was missing Sundown because I found him by the cabin, and then he goes to like the east side of the mountains, but for some reason I just was searching everywhere besides there, and I didn't get Sundown until I'd finished all six other dungeons.
Sundown's a problem too because it's semi-randomized where he ends up. So um, you have to go to a few locations, and he just might not be at the same one twice in a row.
Yeah, I found him at the beginning without too much difficulty. Like, I was just checking all around the mountain area, Heroes Rest, I guess. And I did encounter him for the very first time there, and then he just vanished for 4 hours, and ended up doing his stuff last. But he was in my final party. My final party, like I said before, was Lei Kugo, Pogo, Oboromaru, and Sundown.
The only change between us was I had Cube instead of Pogo, and I had Pogo until the very end.
And yeah, the only change
Too.
between me, yeah, the only change between me and Tom was he had Yun while I had Leikugo.
We all kind of came in
So
pretty clustered.
Yeah.
we settled on very similar parties, but I think maybe that's I mean you hit on Cube a little bit already. Cube has some really good moves, especially if you give him equipment from Akira's chapter. But his HP is super low. He doesn't level up, and and if you find a bunch of robot parts, you can update his stats, including his HP, but they're a little rare. And also all the robot parts I got in Akira's chapter didn't carry over, which I
Oh
thought was
no.
strange.
Also with Cube, I think like there's so that the battles in his chapter are so minimal that I felt I had a better grip of what the other characters' like strengths and weaknesses were. So I wasn't like that comfortable choosing him as a character, sort of going into the final fight.
I had when I had Cube around, I had him just use for some reason his best moves didn't deal a lot of damage except for the laser that penetrates defense. So I would mostly have him as a heal bot, boosting stats and healing others, while I had Leikugo and Oboromaru just absolutely wrecking stuff. Um, Again, like Leikugo with the Sacred Dragon's Temper and the Heavenly Peaks Descent were just absolute murderers. But yeah, that was my rotating spot at the end. Does Yoon learn all the same moves that Leikugo does?
From what I like, Heavenly Peaks Descent definitely had that one. I don't know if
Mhm.
he learns all the same, but I think they must be very similar.
Yeah, there's I think like one or two that are separated out between them because they're. I know that Hong gets something something feast that's an earth attack that I know I didn't get as Lei.
Yeah, that you definitely didn't have that.
Yeah, Lay gets the dragon's temper, the roaring tiger, and the horses, the heavenly horses trample before Heavenly Peak's descent. But I almost want to replay this game and just picking a different one of them, because Imperial China was my favorite chapter. It was like the one where I sort of felt the closest to the characters. So I that's why I chose Lei Kugo as my main for the final chapter. But like this game has multiple endings and a bunch of different ways things can go, and it's not that long. I think it's almost ripe for the replayability. Like, I am very interested in just doing the Orsted side of the final chapter. um like, I don't know, maybe sooner rather than later. Tom, did you do uh just a hero version of the final chapter, or did you also try out Orsted's side?
Well, I did just do the hero chapter, and I'm sure we'll talk about the proper ending to that. But the first time round, at the ending, like, you get a choice, and I actually chose the bad option, and
Oh, so okay, so you executed Orsted at the end.
yeah, yeah, and it
Right.
is probably the most disappointing ending to a game ever. You basically, the fight lasts about 3 hits, and then you roll credits. It's pretty much it.
Okay, well, let's go into the real version of that, because the best ending happens is if you recruit all 7 characters, although you're only allowed 4 at once. But once you settle on your party, you go up the tower. You need to find Hash's old sword at the hero's rest before you can go into the tower. But you go through it. It's the maps are recycled wholesale from the Middle Ages chapter, although the enemies are very different, and the enemies drop healing items and special items from everyone's chapters. And there's a bunch of new equipment, of course, as well. Not just the final weapons in each character dungeon, but at the end where you encounter Ursted again, you defeat him in a challenging-ish boss fight. And then you have the option to kill Orsted or let him live. And to get the best ending, you have to let him live, walk away. Then the 3 party members that weren't with you all catch up to you, and you also all 7 characters are together. Then each of them has to fight a version of their boss fight from each of their individual chapters solo. And after you do those 7 battles, you fight a new version of Dark Lord Odio, which is pretty strong, but I was a little bit over leveled, especially with my main 4, so it wasn't that challenging. And then after you defeat that, um, your 4 party members are knocked aside by one of Odio's attacks. Your other 3 join the battle and then deal some more damage, and then they're knocked aside by Odio's attacks. Then, I don't know, because of their hero spirit burning through, or the nature of the world bending towards justice, maybe all 7 revive. All 7 get a chance to attack Odio back to back to back to back, and that frees Ersted from Odio's control, and Ersted delivers the final blow on Odio. Odio dies, but then, as like in his death rattle, he says, uh, "As long as there is hate in the hearts of humankind, I will return." And you get a very sweet ending of everyone going back to their time period, other than Ersted, I think, and getting a version of a happy ending. Some of which are just amusing, some of which are hilarious. I'm mostly thinking of Pogo here.
Yeah, Pogo with the baby.
Yeah, Pogo has a baby with Beru, and then Gori shows up and says, "Ha! I let me show you babies." And then 5 gorilla ladies come in, each with a baby, which is a shocking turn of events for Pogo. But like, it's a very sweet ending, where Ersted finally is sort of laid to rest, I think. And uh but there's a lot leading up to this. Like, the individual character dungeons are unique and sometimes pretty interesting. Did you guys read the minds of all the flames in Akira's dungeon?
Most of them.
Yeah, some of them, but not all.
I actually got into Akira's dungeon by fleeing, which turns into teleport.
Yeah, that
Um,
happened to me.
Yes.
and I ended up in Akira's dungeon and
That's how
finished
you
it from there.
access it, because
Is
Akira's
that the only way?
teleport. Yeah, I think so. Akira's teleport move, when Akira's in your party, flee is replaced by teleport, and teleport has a 100% chance of working, while flee only works like 80% of the time or something. But if you teleport enough times, you accidentally are transported to a dark version of the castle, and Akira can read the minds of all the souls floating around there, including Uranus and Aletheia and the Minister. most of them are very angry at Erstead, but some of them sort of pity him and ask you to put him to rest. So it's there's breadcrumbs here about what this is all leading to, and I think one other person there gives you a hint of that you need to find Brion, you need to find the sword of Hash to enter it. So it's that that one has more dialogue and more story than most of the other character dungeons, but each of them is at least somewhat interesting. It took me a while to get through cubes because I wanted to see if I could do it without just looking up the solution to the puzzle. Uh, but I got there eventually.
I think the longest dungeon for me was Akira's because like I say, we just got teleported in and I had no idea where I was. I just spent maybe a good like 20 minutes just running around trying to figure out what was going on.
For me, the longest one was Aboromaru's because at certain points you need items called rusty keys to get through doors, and an enemy called a shadow, which is a ninja, is the only way to get rusty keys. So at multiple points, I needed a key to go forward, so I just walked in a line back and forth until I got into a fight with a shadow, so I could get another key. So otherwise, it wasn't a tough dungeon, but it just took a while to rusty key farm.
Yeah, and I do feel they were at least fairly generous with like the spawn rates of the particular enemy, the ninja.
Not for me, they weren't.
Oh really?
I had some bad luck with shadows. But Wes, did you have a particularly interesting character dungeon or a favorite in the final chapter?
I kind of loved Sundowns because it's a kind of a echo of his chapter where you have 8 bells to set up all your traps and everything. So every time a bell rings, you're running shorter on time. You kind of have to do that. Move a little bit more quickly. And in his dungeon, the bells ring, but at the end of 8 bells, a much more powerful boss comes and fights you, and you get a really nice armor if you manage to defeat that boss.
Yeah, there are I think 5 super bosses in the final dungeon. I only fought 2 of them, and one of them was the one at the end of Sundowns. But they each give you, I think it's called a cosmic piece of equipment. There's a cosmic helm, armor, gloves, boots, and ring, and they're very strong. And I when I after I fought one of them, I'm like, maybe I can fight the others. Maybe this wasn't so bad. But then I saw that one of them requires running away from enemies for 100 times, and I decided I didn't want to do that, and I could just beat the game.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
I didn't do all the super bosses either. I'm there with you.
I did 2 of them. I did the one that was in Cube's dungeon and the one that was in Sundown's dungeon, and that's it. I worry that I've accidentally called Sundown Sundance multiple times in this episode. I'm sorry if if I've done that, but
Pretty sure I did that earlier as well.
yeah. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is a great movie. It's and Paul Newman and Robert Redford were handsome devils back in the 70s. So yeah, great movie. Anyway, back to the final chapter. Tom, did you have a particularly favorite or interesting character dungeon?
Clearly, you may not have had a great time in the dungeon with the spawn rates, but I actually really enjoyed Obermaru's dungeon. I just like the design, and I quite like the sort of, I guess you could say like roguelike fashion. Not it's maybe the wrong word, but sort of a Metroidvania style dungeon. I quite enjoyed that.
Yeah, there was some nonlinearity to it. There was multiple entrances. All of the different entrances connected eventually, but it was it was a good, well designed dungeon. I just had bad luck with the spawn rate of those keys. It made it feel a little bit longer than I think it should have.
I think in general it was probably one of the longer dungeons. Like it was a bit drawn out at some points, I think.
Yeah, some of them were on the long side. Masaru's was really short. It's just a straight line the whole way, and then after you get hit with no enemies, and then after you get his weapon, the all the chests that were locked become unlocked, and the enemy spawn rate goes from 0 to higher than average. So you can sprint out of there and not collect any chests, or take your time and fight a whole bunch of enemies. It's all of the dungeons were at least different and interesting. The Earth and Heart Masters dungeon is it's sort of a martial arts puzzle where you have to where rocks can only be broken by specific moves, and you fight a very heavy set martial arts master that's sort of chasing you around the dungeon. I thought that one was pretty good. I mean, the final chapter has 7 pretty good RPG dungeons, 7 characters to recruit, or 6 since you get one automatically, and a lot of treasure and a lot of space to explore. It was even though the map was returned from chapter 8, it was a pretty satisfying finale. Like I had a better time than usual like being the final act of a JRPG, especially since I've played so many JRPGs that seem to end with a whimper or are a little bit or limp to a finish, as it were.
Yeah, it does. It goes out with a bit of a bang, I'd say. Yeah, I mean, I think especially if you do some of the optional boss fights. I mean, I only did the one in Pogo's dungeon, the like the golden fish one.
Right, yeah. I found that one, but you need an item from a different dungeon
Yeah, was it
before
the
he'll fight you.
golden top knot? I think it was, or something like that.
I eventually did find that, and I thought about going back to Pogo's dungeon, because it's in one of the other character dungeons, and I thought about going back to Pogo's, but I decided I just wanted to get to the end of the game, so I skipped that. And there's one in Cube's dungeon, the one in Pogo's dungeon, the one at the end of Sundown's dungeon, then one that's in the final dungeon, but you have to like find Ursted and then go all the way back to the beginning to fight it, and then another one you have to run away from 100 fights to get to that one. Is if my memory from the guide I checked is correct.
Yeah, I have definitely didn't have time to run away from 100 fights.
Wes, did you do any of the super bosses? I know you mentioned Sundowns already.
Yeah, Sundowns I think was the only one that I did. I just bypassed the catfish. I figured if I ran into it, I'd fight it since I had the golden top knot, but didn't end up in my wanderings. And by that point, I'm like, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning. I should finish this sucker, shouldn't I?
Yeah, Pogo's dungeon is a bit of a maze as well, so it's
Yeah.
it's not you won't necessarily always find it. I did find it, but decided not to backtrack and go back through his dungeon again. But I think that we're all approaching this from a pretty positive angle. I mean, and again, the final ending was sort of satisfying and cute. I really liked Lei Kugo's final scene as well, because it looks like that bandits are entering the old dojo again, that they might attack, but then you see a bunch of the muscle bandits just sitting patiently in the dojo, and Lei Kugo leading a bunch of children in a martial arts lesson. So she revives, or Yun or Hong revives the Earth and Heart school, which is you know that's you love to see it. And I mentioned Pogo's really amusing ending scene. Tom or Wes, did either of you have a favorite post credits scene or mid credits scene?
Mine was definitely Pogo's. I think that ending was quite heartwarming.
It was Cube for me. Like the relationship between Cube and Kato just makes me all teary eyed and happy.
And I wasn't expecting this. This is mostly in Cube's chapter and not the final chapter. But when the military guy warms up to Cube and reveals that he hates robots, which he calls clanks or clunks, I forget, because he lost friends in the robot wars decades earlier. Like, for him to warm up to Cube was a sweet moment in that chapter, and for Cube to go up to him and Kato and just be a good little robot boy was quite nice.
I think all their endings are really positive, which is nice. And I don't know if you picked up, but when you defeat Orsted, or at the end, and there's sort of a speech by, well, at least in my case, it was Obamaru who I picked, and there's a line where it says, "Great reward is found in mercy," and obviously at that point, if you chose that ending, you were merciful to Orsted, and I think that's sort of maybe their endings are sort of a representation of great reward found in mercy.
I wonder if everyone's final speech is different, because Lei Kugo's was pretty unique. She even says to Orsted, "You remind me of what I used to be. I always wanted what other people had, and felt like the world was unfair to me. But after I met my Shifu and discovered my kung fu, I know right now that like how I should act." And like I can't imagine obviously Cube or Pogo saying that, but maybe I would also have difficulty like having Masaru say that. It's my guess is the final speech differs between the main characters quite a bit, and that makes me like curious about maybe trying to run through it again with a new main character.
Yeah, I think it must because Obamaru he basically says that he used to blindly accept orders and he would have basically taken anyone's life without reason. And I think his final quote is I've written it down is we who wield the power of life and death wield not the power to shape the world and its people as we see fit.
Yeah, that's definitely different from Lake Hugo. Wes, Sundown was your main character. What was his final speech like?
He didn't have a huge one. I didn't write it down enough to quote it specifically because Sundown's kind of this intentionally quiet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a taciturn man.
But it was about how, wielding power for the weak, the opposite of what Hash's whole philosophy became. How, the weak are leeches is kind of how Hash ended up by the end. Um, Sundown was more about how that's kind of the best thing that you can do if you're strong is to help the weak.
Yeah, again, I don't have them in front of me necessarily, but those are three different takes that are all at least interesting. And now I kind of want to, run the final chapter again with Pogo just to see what nonsense happens in that final standoff. But I'm more likely to just run through the final chapter again with Ursted as the main character, just to see the evil demon lord ending, because that's interesting to me as well. But I think that what we all do have in common is that we liked this game a lot. It's an anthology style RPG, which is unusual. It goes through 8 different genres before having them coalesce into a final chapter. I mean, I don't know if you guys have played Octopath Traveler, but when the final chapter comes together for those 8 characters, it's way less interesting and less epic than what happens in Live Alive. But playing this, I really see the Live Alive influence in other games. Like Octopath really does feel like elements from Saga games and elements from Live Alive into a modern package. You can tell. I think we mentioned in the previous episode that Undertale definitely has some Live Alive influence, but this is a really interesting, cool game. That I'm sure if I had gone through and played all of it when I first tried it 15 years ago or so, I'm sure I would appreciate it even more if I had played it earlier. This is a special game, and the remake, at least to me, seems great. Wes, you've played the Super Famicom original and the remake. Like, do you see any reason to go back to the original version?
Honestly, no. This version is so good. This is the version you should play. Everything from like the improved visuals to voice acting to how the gameplay works. It loses almost nothing and just gains.
And maybe with the exception of ninja movies, because I haven't really seen a lot of a lot of those. Like every genre that they explore in those first 8 chapters is something that I really like, whether it's fighting games or sci-fi horror or traditional fantasy RPGs. Or you know what? Maybe I don't watch a lot of dinosaur movies either. Like I'm not sure I've seen really any besides Jurassic Park, but like it, as in like it seems like a fun wacky genre exploration, but then it becomes something more than that. Like I was disappointed by the finale of Octopath Traveler and think that game is sort of less than the sum of its parts, while Live Alive is more than the sum of its parts, and I was so impressed. Now Tom, you are maybe half the age of Wes or I, so you are coming with a different perspective, but what were your overall feelings about Live Alive by the end?
I think you summed up like pretty perfectly. It's just it's I'm really pleased that I think Square took a chance on this game. I think like it's definitely not a game that's easy to market in some respects, and the fact that they did, and from what I've sort of read around it, actually making a game in HD 2D is a lot more expensive than you'd think. So it's really nice to see them sort of bring back games that really didn't get their chance and bring them to an audience that can appreciate them with sort of modern day touches and visuals.
And I think we did mention this in the previous episode, but this is a very early Yoko Shimomura soundtrack. It was the first one that she worked on when she changed jobs from working with Capcom to Square in 1993 or 1994. And the game uses a lot of musical motifs and themes, or I should say reuses a couple, but then changes them for the instrumentation or tone of the setting of that particular chapter a lot. And that's impressive, but also just being really beautiful on its own. This was a great soundtrack. I mean, I almost won't accept arguments to the contrary. Sorry.
Megalomania.
Yes,
That's such an awesome theme.
it's one of the best boss fight themes I've ever heard, and it's actually Toby Fox of Undertale fame actually had mentioned how Megalovania was impacted by that song, and that's why the name is so similar. Not a coincidence. Toby Fox just absolutely loved that theme.
Yeah, and you know what? This is unrelated to music, but somewhat related to sound. Did you notice in the credits of each chapter that there was a recurring name in the Japanese voice roles?
No.
I did not.
Um, there's one voice actor who voices a minor character in Japanese in every chapter. That's Tomokazu Sugita. He's a very successful Japanese voice actor. He's one of the main characters in Persona 5, in Fire Emblem Awakening, in a bunch of anime like Haruhi Suzumiya and One Piece and Chobits. He's a very successful, popular voice actor. But Live Alive is his favorite video game. So when he heard about a remake, he basically allegedly through his talent agency asked to be in the game however they could. So and they were flattered that he wanted that. So they gave him a small role in every chapter. He's the restaurant owner in Imperial China. I think he's the minister in Orsted's chapter, but yeah. So there's one guy, a popular voice actor, Tomokazu Sugita, who's in every chapter in the Japanese voice cast, which I was amused by.
Yeah, that's really cool.
He's also one of the JoJos in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. He gets around a lot. But yeah, like this is a great video game that was maybe a bit of a lost entry in Square's catalog because it never released outside Japan, and it got a remake that I think that at least I think is worthy of the original, and that's about as best as you can hope for. Because we've all played good remakes and somewhat disappointing remakes, but I mean this is one of the good ones, right?
Yeah, I mean, I
Absolutely.
think so. And I think like obviously I don't really have the perspective of the original, but the fact that Wes came out and said, actually there's no reason to go back to the old one, which isn't always the case with a remake, just shows the quality of it.
Yeah, I think there will always be people who want the history lesson and who are going to yell at me for saying that, but I don't think that there are many people who would disagree that your first playthrough, this is the one. This is the one to play. Not just because it's the only legit release we have in the West.
I'm sure a few Google searches could lead you to the original version in a playable form, but I'm not compelled to do that. Like this was a great RPG experience. I might replay parts of it now just to see other endings and other dialogues, but I'm really happy we played this game for the podcast. This was like when it was announced, I immediately sort of put it in line for it to be a retro episode because I knew it was going to be a good fit that way, but my expectations were met or exceeded at every point. This is a great one, and again, it's not a 60-hour epic. It's 25 hours and probably faster if you know what you're doing. Unlike me, so yeah, play this game, and Earth and Heart Shifu is the best. And listeners, if you joined us for these two episodes celebrating Live Alive, thank you. But also thank you, Tom, and thank you, Wes, for joining me on this. It was a delight talking about this game to both of you. And for this was Wes's second time round, but in the first time around for Tom and I, yeah. I mean, we're giving this 3 thumbs up.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so, thank you, audience. Thank you, panelists. Let's tell you about the future of Retro Encounter, the near future, like just like Akira's chapter. Coming soon next week, we're doing an episode of Secret of Monkey Island, which is kicking off our autumn of adventure. 4 weeks in a row of a different adventure game each day. First, Secret of Monkey Island, then The Wolf Among Us, then Broken Age, and then finally The Quarry. That is, I believe, 4 adventure games, each published in a different decade and with some shared staff in between, but in general, telling the story of how adventure games have evolved and have been marketed over the years. So I'm really excited to play all of those. I'm about halfway done with Secret of Monkey Island, but I'm going to be playing a lot of adventure games over the next few weeks. And after the quarry, that is going to be episode 50, or the quarry is episode 349, and then we have episode 350. I'm in the process of preparing that episode, but we have something very fun planned, and I'm excited to see how that turns out as well. And listeners, if you have questions for us or comments directed at us about Live Alive or episode 350 or adventure games or anything else, the best way to reach us is to email retro@rpgfan.com. RPGFan.com has many other ways to interact with, though, including the message boards on the main website, our Facebook page, on Twitter and Instagram. We are called RPG Fancom. There's also a Discord server, a YouTube channel, a Twitch channel, something going on basically every day on all of these things. So please visit RPG Fan or interact with RPG Fan however you choose. Another great way to interact with RPG Fan is through our other podcasts, Random Encounter every 2 weeks about randomness and current events in RPG video games, and Rhythm Encounter every other 2 weeks about music in RPGs. And the most recent slice of RPG Fan to explore is the RPG Fan shop. You can go to rpgfan.com/shop, and it will link you to our merch store, which is hosted by tpublic.com. You can pick up shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, phone cases, I believe pins, and a number of other things with RPG Fan emblazoned on them, with more merch to come at a later date. And if you were to review us, Retro Encounter, or the other RPG Fan podcasts on Apple Podcasts or Google Play or Spotify or wherever, we appreciate every comment, especially positive comments that are 5 stars out of 5. But if you want to give our panelists 5 stars out of 5, and not just as a podcast, how do you reach them? Let me ask them, starting with you, Tom.
You can find me on Twitter at VoicelessTom.
Now, Wes.
Best place for me is Twitter as well, at Wes Iliff.
And for me, I'll also share my Twitter account. I am at The Real Monsoon most of the time, at Evoker for Dogs at other times, and on RPG Fans Discord, I am Monsoon Mike. So, let's see. I definitely have some Secret of Monkey Island to play, and I definitely have some near future tokusatsu themed things I could be watching or playing. But you know what? I'm just going to live my own life as best as I can. Listeners, thank you, good night, and good luck.